The air at Thornbrook Estate did not just sit, it shimmered with the scent of wet earth and the metallic tang of an approaching spring storm. Margot Finch was elbow-deep in that soil, her fingers tracing the delicate root system of a Pyrus caloriana, an ornamental pear tree that had cost more than most men in the village earned in a year. To the world of the Ton, she was a scandal in breeches, a woman who dared to treat the earth as a canvas. To herself, she was an architect of living things. 3 degrees to the west, Samuel, Margot commanded, her voice steady despite the physical strain. If the afternoon sun hits the bark at a perpendicular angle during the August heat, the sap will scald. I will not have this tree suffer because we were too lazy to use a compass. Samuel, a man whose face was etched with the lines of 40 years of labor, merely nodded. He had learned 3 years ago that Margot Finch did not guess, she knew. She saw the garden not as a collection of plants, but as a living, breathing symphony of light, shadow, and survival. Margot wiped a smudge of dark loam across her forehead, unaware that it joined several other streaks of dirt that marked her as a laborer. Her hair, once pinned in a sensible knot, had long since surrendered to the wind, falling in wild, dark waves around her face. She was a daughter of a scholar, a woman who should have been sipping tea in a drawing room, yet here she was, caked in mud, challenging the very foundations of aristocratic propriety. "What on earth is happening to my gardens?" The voice was not merely a question, it was an indictment. It carried the weight of centuries of inherited land and the cold, sharp edge of a winter frost. Margot turned, squinting against the glare of the midday sun. Standing on the marble terrace of the manor house was Gabriel Thorne, the Viscount Thornbrook. He had been a ghost for 2 years, a name at the bottom of bank drafts and a signature on legal tallies, while he distracted himself with the hollow glitter of London. He was dressed in a coat of midnight blue superfine, his cravat tied with a precision that mocked the chaos of the garden. He looked like a man who had never felt the sting of a blister or the satisfaction of a day's hard labor. "Your gardens, my lord, are finally waking up," Margot replied, refusing to wipe her hands before she stood. She matched his stare, her spine as straight as the sapling she had just planted. Though I suppose to a man who has spent 2 years looking at nothing but cobblestones and candlelight, the sight of actual life might be a bit of a shock. Gabriel descended the steps, his boots clicking with an arrogant rhythm against the stone. He surveyed the upturned earth, the piles of mulch, and the scattered tools with an expression of pure disdain. "I left a lawn that was as smooth as a billiard table, Miss Finch. I returned to a construction site. My aunt mentioned you were energetic. She failed to mention you were intent on terraforming the entire county." "Your lawn was a lie, Gabriel," Margot said, dropping the formal "my lord" in her heat. "It was a green desert that supported nothing but the vanity of your ancestors. I am building a sanctuary. Thyme, lavender, sage, and roses that actually have a scent. I am giving this estate a soul." Gabriel stopped inches from her. The contrast was a visual representation of their worlds. He was all crisp linen and polished silver. She was dirt, sweat, and sun-kissed skin. "You have 6 months," he said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register, "until the harvest ball. If this sanctuary is anything less than a masterpiece, I will have the entire thing paved over, and you, Miss Finch, will be looking for work in the colonies." "Challenge accepted," Margot whispered. The months that followed were a grueling ballet of labor. Margot worked from the first light of dawn until the stars claimed the sky. She fought the clay-heavy soil, the unpredictable English rain, and the constant, biting critiques of Lady Beatrice, Gabriel's aunt, who viewed Margot as a plague upon the family's dignity. But a strange thing began to happen.
Gabriel did not return to London. He found himself drawn to the library window, watching Margot. He watched the way she moved, the way she spoke to the men, and the way she looked at a blooming flower with more tenderness than he had ever seen in a London ballroom. One afternoon, during a particularly stubborn heat wave, Gabriel appeared in the garden without his coat, his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were surprisingly corded with muscle. "The drainage pipe in the north quadrant is blocked," he said, handing her a glass of cold lemonade. "I saw the water pooling from the balcony. Shall I call the workmen, or does the great architect prefer to handle the mud herself?" Margot took the glass, her fingers brushing his. The contact was electric, a spark of fire in the humid air. "The great architect is currently occupied with the rose grafts, my lord. If you're so concerned about your pipes, perhaps you should remember how to use a shovel." To her utter shock, Gabriel didn't take offense. He took the shovel. By midsummer, the Stone Lord had become a man of the earth. He and Margot spent hours debating the placement of stone benches and the merits of different varieties of climbing ivy. The friction between them hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into a heat that neither of them knew how to extinguish. They were two people trapped in a romantic bubble of their own making, isolated from the world of rank and duty by the very hedges they were planting together. But the world outside Thornbrook was not so easily ignored. Lady Beatrice was orchestrating a match between Gabriel and Lady Cassandra, a woman of impeccable lineage and a dowry that could buy 3 estates like Thornbrook. She saw the way Gabriel looked at the gardener. She saw the dirt under his fingernails and the light in his eyes, and she knew she had to strike. The night of the harvest ball arrived. The gardens were a miracle. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 roses, and the moonlight played across the stone paths like liquid silver. It was a triumph, but for Margot, it felt like a funeral. She watched from the shadows of the pear tree as Gabriel danced with Lady Cassandra. She saw the way the Ton whispered about him, the way they looked at the garden as a backdrop for their own vanity, never seeing the sweat and tears that watered every petal. "You don't belong here, Miss Finch," Lady Beatrice whispered, appearing like a specter beside her in the dark. "You've done a good job with the weeds, but don't mistake a lord's boredom for affection. Tomorrow, Gabriel will announce his engagement. Your bags should be packed by dawn." The words were a poison that Margot had no antidote for. She looked at Gabriel, grand, powerful, and utterly unreachable, and realized that a gardener could never be a duchess. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, Margot was at the gates. She had her small trunk, her sketches, and a heart that felt like it had been hollowed out with a spade. She had arranged for a carriage to take her to a new project, miles away from the man who had broken her spirit. As she was stepping into the carriage, her foot on the metal step, a shout tore through the morning mist. "Margot, stop!" Gabriel was galloping down the drive, his horse lathered in sweat. He looked as if he hadn't slept, his hair wild and his eyes bloodshot. He threw himself from the saddle, nearly falling in his haste to reach her. "Where are you going?" he gasped, grabbing the carriage door to prevent it from closing. "The work is finished, Gabriel," Margot replied, a whole of her usual fire. "The gardens are perfect. The ball was a success. I've done what I was hired to do." "You weren't hired to leave me," Gabriel roared, his pride finally shattering in the cool morning air. "I spent all night searching for you. I told Cassandra the engagement was a lie. I told Beatrice to leave Thornbrook. I don't want a duchess of rank, Margot. I want the woman who taught me that a garden is only beautiful because of the person who tends it." "You can't," Margot whispered, tears blurring her vision. "The scandal, the Ton, they'll ruin you." Gabriel stepped into the carriage, crowding her against the velvet seat. He took her mud-stained hands in his and kissed her knuckles. "Let them talk. Let them whisper. I would rather spend my life in a garden of dirt with you than in a palace of gold without you. I'm not asking you to be my gardener anymore, Margot. I'm asking you to be my wife. I'm begging for one last chance to show you that a man of stone can be made of something better." Margot looked at him, the Viscount who had traded his status for a plea. She saw the man she had worked beside, the man who had learned to love the soil as much as she did. "I won't wear gloves in the rose garden," she warned, a sob of relief catching in her throat. "Then I'll be there to wash your hands," he replied, pulling her into a kiss that tasted of salt, earth, and the beginning of a new world. The carriage didn't leave Thornbrook that day. Instead, it returned to the manor, carrying a duke and his future duchess back to the sanctuary they had built together. The scandal, as predicted,